Yes, hello everybody. Welcome here at Ecolodge Rendezvous. I would like to thank Maria and Michelle for hosting this event, and especially thanks to Cat's Eye Cottage for accommodating Brent and his wife, and also Busy Bee for providing breakfast every morning. So I want to introduce to you our keynote speaker. Species. We're going to talk about species tonight, but it's also species. Mr. Brent Winner. He received his master's degree in marine biology from the University of North Carolina. He's been a research scientist with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission for 24 years. He did research on several fish species, and I find it quite adventurous and courageous that he has been tagging great white sharks and as part of his research. Let's hear a big applause for Brent Winner.
Oh, I gotta get something on here. Sorry. Thank you very much for everybody coming. It's fabulous to be here in Saba. I'm a rookie at Saba, and it's a magnificent place. We've been soaking up the island as much as we can these past 2 days. From the ride over on the ferry, and then we went snorkeling on the first day on Sunday, which was fabulous. And today we hiked the Sandy Cruise Trail. Is that the name?
Yep.
Yes. Now, to me, it's a very interesting name because I didn't see any sand on the trail, and it definitely wasn't a cruise. Most cruises you go on are very relaxing kind of thing. It was very challenging and beautiful. Actually, I weighed 300 pounds this morning, and I just worked it all off on the trail. It was amazing, but we survived, made it back to the Sea&Learn tent, and got a little time to relax before this evening. So a little story about myself before we get rolling. Myself and my wife, we both grew up in Iowa. I don't know if you know where that's at. It's in the center of the United States, and there's not an ocean for thousands of miles, just corn and soybeans and pigs and cows. But in the 3rd grade, 8 years old or whatever, I decided that this is what I wanted to do, was study marine biology. And many books and years of study and of adventure has brought me to this, gorgeous paradise, talking to you guys about an amazing group of fishes. So what I'd like to share with you first is I want to read you a story. These are my distance glasses, so I have to pull them down, otherwise I can't read. So everybody take a deep breath. Isn't it okay? We're all here. We can see the screen. This is you floating in the water. It's nice and peaceful. I know many of you are divers. And just soak this in for a second. The fish smelled her now. The vibrations, erratic and sharp, signaled distress. The fish began to circle close to the surface. His dorsal fin broke the water, and his tail, thrashing back and forth, cut the glassy surface with a hiss. A series of tremors shook its body. For the first time, the woman felt fear, though she did not know why. Adrenaline shot through her trunk and her limbs, generating a tingling heat and urging her to swim faster. She guessed that she was 50 yards from shore, and she could see the line of white foam where the waves broke on the beach. She saw the lights in a house, and for a comforting moment, she thought that she saw someone pass by a window. Now, the fish was about 40 feet away from the woman, off to the side, when it turned suddenly to the left and dropped beneath the surface, and with 2 quick thrusts of its tail, was upon her. At first, the woman thought she had snagged her leg on a rock or a piece of floating wood. There was no initial pain, only one violent tug on her right leg, and she reached down to touch her foot, treading water with her left leg to keep her head up and feeling in the blackness with her left hand. She could not find her foot. She reached higher on her leg, and then she was overcome by a rush of nausea and dizziness. Her groping fingers had found a nub of bone and tattered flesh. She knew that the warm pulsing flow over her fingers in the chilled waters was her own blood. Pain and panic struck together, and the woman threw her head back and screamed a guttural cry of terror. Whew. Is that spooky? It gives me shivers every time I read it. Who wrote this book? Peter Benchley. It is Jaws. And this book, and of course the movie To Follow, changed our perception, many of our perceptions of what sharks are. What's their role in the ocean? How does it relate to us, in a sense? What I hope to do tonight is try to break down some of those barriers for some of you, and maybe educate you on different species and different aspects of and the diversity of this magnificent group of fishes. So, at the basic part of it, let's look at what is a shark. All right, let's look at what a shark. What are some of the scientific characteristics that make this group of fish unique? One, they have a torpedo-shaped body, which is obvious, and they have a special type of tail, which is called a heterocercal tail. And basically that just means that the vertebral column goes into the upper lobe. Okay, it's different from a bony fish. They have a ventral mouth typically, and jaws are present, so they're a jawed fish, which is obvious. They have a unique type of scales that are called placoid scales. And here's if you could see the image, a close electron microscopy shot of placoid scales, and that's, you could see there's kind of why the shark skin is so rough. It has a very unique scale. They have an endoskeleton that's made completely out of cartilage, and of all the characteristics of sharks, this is probably the most unique. Their entire skeleton is made of cartilage, no bone at all. And that puts them in that class of chondrichthyes, they call it. Chondro means chondrocytes, which are the cells that make up cartilage, unique to the shark, skates, and rays. They have a J-shaped stomach, very slow digestion for the most part, and they have a very unique organ that's called a spiral valve, and that's kind of a rough picture of it. And basically, like us as mammals, we have these, long feet of, large intestine, small intestine, to handle the compact nature of a shark and still get the food absorption that they need. They have this spiral valve. So basically, it's just a continuous stairwell, if you will, where the food absorption is concentrated over a long period of time, but in a very compact organ. So it's kind of a magnificent thing. And they have a fairly primitive heart, a two-chambered heart, atrium, ventricle. They have 5 to 7 pairs of gill slits, or gills. And they don't have a bony opercle. If you see the word opercle, a bony opercle, if you've seen a barracuda or a grouper, you see the bony plates that protect its gill slits, which is important for them. Sharks do not have that. So this is actually a very vulnerable place for them. But they'll have 5 to 7. Most of the sharks you see in these areas and shallow areas will have 5 gill slits, and that's same for the batoids. And they have no swim bladder. A swim bladder is kind of like our diving BC that teleos fishes have. So if you see a cuda and he's just sitting there in front of you motionless, he's not moving, he's not really trying very hard, what he's done is filled his swim bladder with a certain amount of air and allows him to be neutrally buoyant. Sharks don't have that luxury. Now, there are some sharks that will gulp air into their stomachs that can change their buoyancy. But basically, most of the buoyancy that sharks get is from their liver. It's also an energy storing organ. These large lobes here are the liver in a shark. They can weigh up to 25% or more of the total body weight of the fish. And they're filled with a stored energy of fat called squalene oil. It's very buoyant. So it not only is a way for them to store energy, but it also provides buoyancy for sharks. They have a well-developed brain, even though it's quite small, and the largest portion is their olfactory lobes, which are here. And that's their sense of smell. So they do have, that's one of the most acute senses that sharks actually have. And they have separate sexes, of course, males and females, and you could tell it externally. So if it's a shark or a ray, you can look at its pelvic fins, which is the second set of fins on the ventral surface. And if you see these structures, these calcified cartilage structures, which are called claspers, then it's a male. Okay? Females will have the pelvic fins, but they won't have the claspers. And of course, those are used for internal fertilization, which is actually an advanced characteristic for a primitive fish like this. So let's look at a few species. Now, this is such a diverse area, the Caribbean. Of course, I spent the last 25 years in Florida, but a lot of our shark fauna is very similar between the two regions. The sharks can move great distances. You guys may have access to some more deep water stuff that we don't see off of Florida. But I'm just going to kind of tap into a few species that might give you an appreciation of the diversity of this group of fish. This is not only the largest shark, it's the largest fish in the ocean, the whale shark. And these guys will get over 40 feet in total length and weigh greater than 20,000 pounds. And this shark, you'd say, well, this thing can eat anything it wants, but it's actually planktivorous, so it's a filter feeder. They've got special gill rakers that allow it to filter food out of the water. And it's a very docile species. This is probably one of the most common sharks you see in this area, which is a nurse shark. Now, a lot of people think that sharks need to swim all the time or they'll die. That's not necessarily true with the nurse shark. And actually, there's several shark species that can have a special type of breathing that allows them to circulate water over their gills. A mako shark, a blacktip, Caribbean reef shark, they breathe by using what we call ram ventilation. So if you see them when you're diving, and they always kind of have their mouth open, don't they? And they're actually breathing, it's ram ventilation. So they just open their mouth, the water goes in, bays over the gills, and out the gill slits. It's just a continuous circulation. But if a mako shark were to, lay on a sandy bottom, he would, die in a fairly short period of time. This species, the nurse shark, this is a common picture where you see them hiding underneath a coral cave or a ledge. They actually have special muscles in their head and buccal region that allows them to circulate that water and keep breathing. So it's a very interesting shark. I don't know if you've seen one of these. These are two different varieties of a thresher shark. This is a common thresher up top, and this one is on a research cruise I was on years ago. This is called a big eye thresher, and these guys are spectacular fish, brilliant blue in color, and their eyes are like the size of a softball. And they're, of course, named after this gigantic upper lobe of their caudal fin that they use to stun fish or schools of fish. There's amazing video online that you can look at of them feeding and whipping their tail through a school of fish and stunning them. This is a mako shark in a couple different angles. Of course, they're most famous for their sharp teeth here. And they're very streamlined. You can see the torpedo-shaped body, a very pointed snout, and they have these caudal keels on the tail on both sides that it kind of flattens their tail, so it makes them even more streamlined and efficient when they're swimming. And they also have a different tail in that it's lunate. In a lot of sharks, this lower lobe is really small, but in the lamnid sharks, which includes the makos and the white sharks, you'll see that both lobes are nearly identical in size. And this is the granddaddy of the lamnidae, which is the white shark, not really prevalent in this area because they like more temperate, cooler waters. But and they're not really prevalent off Florida either. We'll see them certain times of year in the colder months and further offshore. This is another of the common species you see here, Carcrandus prizii, and this is the Caribbean reef shark. Not necessarily, it's not really an aggressive species, but they're very prevalent, especially in areas where people dive. This is a buddy of mine that likes to dive with sharks in certain parts of the Caribbean as well. But they only get about 10 feet in total length. This is a lemon shark. I don't know if you see these here. They are prevalent throughout the Caribbean. In Florida, we have nursery areas in Florida where you'll see the pups like this on the flats and the grass flats. And a great way to tell this species from other carcharodonid sharks is if you look at the dorsal fins, in most carcharodonids, the first dorsal is really high and the second dorsal is very short. But in this species, you see that they're almost nearly the same in size. So that's a key characteristic for lemon sharks. If you're not sure if it's a bull shark or a lemon shark, you can look at the dorsal fins and have a good idea of what species it is. This is probably one of the most common sharks that we see in the Gulf of Mexico. It's the Atlantic sharpnose. And they're not very exciting. They only get about 3 or 4 foot in total length. And they have these white spots when they're mature. They'll get these white spots on them like this. You would see different species of here. Rhizopteron porosus would be a more tropical version that you would see. But they're very prevalent in the Gulf of Mexico. And of course the black tip and spinner. These guys look nearly identical to even the trained eye. They both get about 6 foot in total length. The key way to tell these two species apart is looking at the anal fin, and I've got it side by side here for you. Believe it or not, it doesn't make any sense, the spinner shark has a black tip on its anal fin. So if you saw the two sharks next to each other, if you look at the anal fin, which is the single fin near the tail, you could tell this was a spinner and this is a black tip. And this is one of my favorite sharks because it kind of relates to where I came from in Iowa. I know there's no sharks close to there, but a lot of people have this misperception that sharks are they're way out in the ocean. We don't have to worry about them, but there's a lot of species, including the bull shark, that will come up into estuaries in the mouths of rivers where where there's mixing with salt water and fresh water. And actually, bull sharks can travel into freshwater great distances. When I was at Iowa State University doing my undergraduate work, reading papers, I was a fish nerd, and I ran across this paper of a bull shark caught in the Mississippi River. And you might think, well, that was like down to New Orleans, right? I mean, because it's right there in the Gulf. No, it was in St. Louis, Missouri. So you can imagine, if you know your geography, that is a long way for a shark to swim. And it just really impressed me of the amazing physiology and the actual flexibility of the bull shark itself, being able to be in completely fresh water and complete salt water as well. But this is an aggressive species, and because of its life history and where it lives in the nearshore coastal waters, they're not really intimidated by humans because they're a large-bodied shark, and they often are in waters that are murky like this. So they are accounted for a fair number of shark attacks around the world. This is probably one of the largest predators we see, fairly common in Florida. I'm sure you see them here as well, as the tiger shark. These guys will get upwards of 20 foot in certain parts of their distribution. And these guys, we sometimes call them garbage can with fins, because they can eat just about anything they want. They've got powerful jaws, and I've got a close-up of the teeth that I'll show you a little bit later. But I've done dissections of large tiger sharks and found whole pelicans inside their stomachs. They love to eat sea turtles, dolphins, other sharks, stingrays. So their diet's very diverse. And this is, of course, in the hammerhead family. This is another very common shark where I come from in Tampa Bay. It's the bonnethead shark. And this is the smallest of the hammerhead species. It only gets about 3.5 to 4 foot in total length. And of course, it's known for the bonnet or curved head with the eyes on the side. These guys love to eat blue crabs. That's one of their favorite items to eat in our area. And of course, there's several other hammerheads that you guys would see here, but this is the largest. This is the great hammerhead, Sphaenomorcharan. And these guys will get upwards of 20 feet. They have that famous sickle-shaped dorsal fin. Fabulous shark. Okay, so we're going to jump into a couple different things with their life history. Look at shark feeding for a second. And you could tell by looking at these pictures, many of these species have powerful jaws, and they can cause amazing damage. This is a tarpon fisherman off our area where bull sharks as well as great hammerheads are famous for coming up and biting fish in two. This picture in the lower right is a sandbar shark that probably weighed a couple 100 pounds, and a single bite took him right behind the head. It was on a research cruise I was on, and this is a a large tuna that came up, and you could see the bites. So you can learn a lot about sharks based upon looking just at their teeth. What do they feed on? What do they usually survive on? And that type of thing. They have a unique type of jaw suspension. It's called a hyostylic jaw suspension, and it's so powerful. It's 6 tons per square inch. So they're very powerful depending on the species. But what this jaw suspension is different in ours. We can open our jaw maybe a few inches. But with sharks, their jaw is actually protrusible. So because of this suspension where the jaw is not attached to the skull, the chondrocranium, they can open their mouth almost to 90 degrees. So that it increases their efficiency in feeding and allows them to feed on larger objects. So the teeth are actually modified dermal denticles that aren't embedded in their cartilage jaw, like our teeth are embedded in bone. Theirs are actually just attached by loose tissue, connective tissue in the jaws. And the teeth are actually replaced every 8 days to 2 weeks, depending on the species and the water temperature. And you can learn a lot by looking at this type of teeth they have based upon their feeding strategies. And here's a few examples. This is a tiger shark I was telling you about earlier. You can see that their dentition is similar in both jaws. It's very serrated and sharp, so that's what allows them to feed on a sea turtle, where they can actually chomp on the shell, kick their head or their tail back and forth, which basically allows them to saw through the jaw. We were talking about tooth replacement, and this is a close-up of the inside of the jaw. Usually this is covered by a very thick tissue, so you can't see it. But often when you'll see a shark in the wild, you'll see a few teeth here, but there's actually 8 to 10 rows or additional teeth in each of these rows. So basically picture them as a conveyor belt. So this shark, even if the teeth aren't knocked out, those teeth on the front will gradually just rotate out. And every tooth in succession is just a little bit larger. So as the shark grows larger and larger, his teeth are getting larger and larger as well. So it's like a conveyor belt, a series of them. And here's the diversity of it. You have a mako shark, which has very fine, turn back teeth. These guys feed on fast swimming bait fish or tuna, so they need to grasp a hold of them. Of course, the tiger shark, they can saw through a turtle shell. Or this is the head of a basking shark, and you say, well, he doesn't have any teeth. Well, actually, he has hundreds of teeth right here on the edge of his lips. But he's a filter feeder like the whale shark. So he really doesn't use his teeth. They're dysfunctional, but he does have the teeth almost like a stingray, where you could just rub your fingers along their teeth. So let's look at probably one of the most popular topics that people like to talk about, shark attacks. And we're going to look at it from a couple different angles or perspectives, and hopefully break down some of the barriers or fears that you might have about sharks. This is kind of the thing that, since Jaws, people are terrified of sharks and being eaten alive and that type of thing. And there's a lot of junk out there that you might read, like this 120-foot shark that attacks a sub. It's fictitious. It's not real. And with the internet, of course, this was from a tabloid magazine back in the 80s. I got it. But now with the internet, there's so much misinformation out there, not just about sharks, but by a variety of topics. One needs to be very careful on how they approach that. Recent movie, Sharknado. Who watched Sharknado? Anybody out there? Yeah, it's fun to watch those and laugh at them, I guess, but it kind of gives a twisted perception of what sharks are. Sharktopus was another one that came out recently. And of course, Jaws is that lingering thing that's in our mind, that fictitious work. So as a scientist, what do we do when we're approached with this fear or trying to describe, what are sharks? So, you can't deny they can cause some damage. So what we do is we look at data. We look at scientific fact and to try to make ourselves feel better or try to describe what's going on. So these are shark attack, unprovoked attacks from, the 1960s through 2006, 2007, and these trends continue. And this is real data in the U.S. and the world, and you can see there's a dramatic increase since the late 80s in shark attacks. Okay, this is real data. So that may not make you feel real warm and fuzzy right now. So let's look worldwide at the number of shark attacks we have. And of course, if everyone jumps to Australia, since 1580 through 2010, they've had about 417 shark attacks, 299 off of Africa, and everyone's heard about the jumping white sharks off South Africa. But here you guys are here, the Antilles, Bahamas, that combine 61 shark attacks. And what's unsettling for me, 947 in the United States. There was 235 attacks in Volusia County. There's never been a fatal shark attack in that county, and I'll get to that in a little bit. And let's go a little closer to home. These are statistics from the 1700s through 2012, and the total in Antilles, Bahamas area, there's only been 67 shark bites documented. And the red countries, Cuba, Puerto Rico, are where most of the attacks have occurred. And I don't think we have any color down here on Saba. St. Martin's either blue or green. So there's not many shark attacks that have occurred in this area, or at least been documented. And if we break that down by region, this is the Bahamas region, and then Cuba, Puerto Rico, but still you're talking just a handful of attacks that have occurred in these areas. In Cuba, 11 attacks only, and 7 were fatal, which is actually a very high percentage. In the Netherlands, Antilles, which would include Saba, you've had 2 documented attacks and no fatalities. So you should feel much better than I do in Florida relative to the risk or the data. So when I report this to people in Florida, they feel a little unsettled because they see, okay, the world, shark attacks are on the rise, and I basically live in the shark attack capital of the world. And this is real data, so they want to know, what's going on? Are sharks, changing their food habits? Are they after us? Are they trying to get us in? And we've got to separate fact from fiction, even beyond that. And the fact is, we can't deny that attacks have increased over that time period. But what most experts believe, and I agree with this wholeheartedly, is this red line that follows that trend exactly, doesn't it? That's the population increase in the state of Florida during that time period. And it's not just unique to Florida. If you look around the world, it's basically there's more people in the water, more people scuba diving, more people snorkeling, surfing is a huge thing. So if you will, it's more human behavior than shark behavior. And I've got tons of statistics that reflect that. So if you put more people in the water, the chance of an interaction with a human and a shark is increased, whether it's a jellyfish, stingray, that's true for anything. But this is the reason that most experts believe there's been increases in attacks. And this is one that kind of hits home, and is true in Florida to a T. The big red bars in the last 20, 30 years are surfing. It's exploded as a sport in the United States. And the bites and attacks that have occurred in Florida on the East Coast is a heavy surfing community. So these surfers spend more time in the water than any other group. Even divers are down here, a few attacks here and there, and they haven't really changed much. But these surfers spend a lot of time in the water, and they're more susceptible to attacks. One thing that's comforting is that the fatality rate in shark attacks has plummeted over the past century. In the 1900s, if you were attacked by a shark, you had about a 60+% chance of not surviving that attack. Today, worldwide, the average is around 10%. In Florida, it's only 1%. And the main reason for that is the types of sharks that are biting people. They're smaller sharks, blacktip spinners that are only 5-6 foot. And this is a typical surfing situation where you have murky water, there's bait fish rolling up and down the beach, and these blacktips, there's one here jumping, they're in there feeding, okay? And they're not feeding by sight, okay? I know you hear on Shark Channel and the surfer looks like a seal or a turtle. These sharks aren't feeding by sight per se. These guys are more on vibration, maybe a quick flash of light, that type of thing. So most of the bites in Florida are a grab and release type situation. So, he'll be surfing and, something bit my foot, and he gets a few stitches and he's surfing in a couple weeks. And that's why the the fatality rate in Florida is so low because the size of the shark, it's usually bite and release. And compared to worldwide statistics, where like in Australia, the rate's much higher, if you get bit and released by a 15-foot great white, the damage is usually significantly worse. And that's why the fatality rate is greater on a worldwide scale. But it's comforting to know it's not in Florida that way. So here's some shark attack prevention facts or things that you can put in your toolbox, if you will, if you're diving or on the beach. Always, it's always good the buddy system, swimming together, diving together. Don't wander too far from shore. Individuals can be singled out and more vulnerable. Avoid water during the dark or twilight hours. I mean, I know some of you enjoy night dives and stuff like that, but sharks usually do feed and are more active during those crepuscular periods and night periods. Don't enter the water if you're bleeding, which is a common sense type of thing, of course. Wearing shiny jewelry is discouraged, not just because of sharks, but barracuda, that type of thing. Avoid waters known to have effluents. That's not necessarily an issue here in Saba, but in areas where I'm from, where you have rivers and lots of nutrients, which means lots of food and bait, sharks will gather in those types of areas to actually feed. Because you cite porpoises does not indicate the absence of sharks, because many reasons why the porpoises are there, sharks would be there as well, because they're feeding on similar items. Use extra caution when in waters that are murky, which is an instance in Florida where the murky waters where people are diving. Bright colored clothing and stuff, in contrast, sharks can see that, so they're more attracted to that. Refrain from excess splashing, and it recommends you don't swim with your pets. This I had to give my pup. This is Hooper. He's named after the scientist in Jaws, which is kind of funny. But he's a Basset Hound mixed with Australian Shepherd, and he's a hoot. He's only about that tall, and he's like 6 feet long. He's amazing. He needs another pair of legs to hold himself up. But this is normally what he does. Is just sleep on the couch. But it's not good to go swimming with your dog because the erratic vibrations. Exercise caution when occupying an area between sandbars. So those dips between the beach and the sandbar are often areas where bait fish will congregate, and sharks they know that. They'll go down those areas. And finally, don't enter the water if you see a shark. So that's a smart thing. Usually sharks are on the move. So if you're at the beach and you see sharks swimming in the area, just calmly get out, wait for them to go by, and then get back to the beach. So let's look at some relative risks, some other data. Sharks versus lightning, okay? What are the odds of being struck by lightning? Well, they're much higher in Florida, where there have been, during this time period, 1959 to 2010, nearly 500 people were struck by lightning, and 9 of those were fatal, okay? Where shark attacks, you have like a 1 in 3.7 million odds of being bitten by a shark in the state of Florida, and 1 in 80,000 lightning. So it's much higher odds of being struck by lightning than being bitten by a shark. Have many of you seen the show Home Improvement? You remember that show, Tim Taylor? Like that? I love that show. And this is an actual scientific study. I know it was done a while ago, back in 1996. But what they did is they looked at different home implements and compared them to shark attacks or incidents of injury by sharks. So the top of the list was screws and nails. Almost 200,000 people were sent to the hospital from these deadly nails and screws. 140,000 were injured on ladders, which kind of makes sense. I mean, I've fallen off a ladder before. I survived, which is a good thing. I was holding a chainsaw at the time, which wasn't good. And this one blows me away. 43,687 people were injured by toilets. And I don't know if it was like during installation or during use, but this is real data. And, it kind of hit me thinking about this statistic that, ladies, everyone knows that ladies are smarter than guys, right?
Oh yeah.
And this statistic proves that you never see a woman going alone to the bathroom. There's safety in numbers, right? So guys, we might want to learn from that a little bit. 10,000 people were injured by buckets. You see the trend here, and a whopping 18 people were injured by sharks. So you kind of got those, you know, getting that relative risk in there from lightning to toilets. And this is, like I said, in a worldwide average, there's about 64 shark attacks worldwide. Only 10% are about fatal. In Florida, it's only 1%. And this is relative to other animal species, okay? 250 people, these are fatalities due to pachyderms every year. I know we don't have any elephants around here, but it's just outrageous to think of that many people dying from elephant injuries. 1,250, a huge number, from bees and wasps. 2,500, twice that amount, fatalities due to crocodilians and alligators, which is, we see a lot of people, you know, like lose their small dogs that walk along ponds in Florida. So this is a very real threat in the state of Florida. Many more people get injured. 100 million, any guesses as to what this would refer to? Mosquitoes, that's a good question. That's a good guess. Yeah, actually, that is a little bit high estimate, but that's the number of sharks that are estimated killed by man every year. And some of you have maybe seen the Shark Water a few years back, a documentary, and these are real problems that scientists, managers of these amazing fish are dealing with on a you know, daily basis to try to preserve some of these amazing species. So if you will, to end, I want to talk a little bit about shark fisheries. You know, why are shark populations decreasing? Why are we harvesting 100 million sharks a year across the entire planet? And this kind of says it all, money. It's for money. And I don't want you to focus on these individual statistics here, but most shark fisheries since, you know, the early 1900s have had this characteristic of boom and bust, okay? And that's related not only to the type of fishery and the products they're harvested, but it's very intimately tied to the life history and biology of these species, which I'll tap into. So this is very characteristic of shark fisheries. They are not sustained for a very long period of time. Some of the products that were harvested early on and to a certain degree are still today, one was the livers. And remember I said that they are used for buoyancy, but they have that squalene oil, which is very rich in vitamin A. They discovered early on. You could get upwards of $15 a pound in the mid-30s to upwards of 1950. That $15 a pound is a huge amount of money back then for shark livers. So sharks were being killed and harvested just for their livers and the vitamin A. Here's the bust part of it, is in 1950, synthetic vitamin A was invented or came about, and that part of the fishery just completely collapsed. It wasn't profitable anymore. Another is shark hides, which was fairly prevalent during those early shark fisheries and stuff, and it's very labor intensive to clean a shark, take its hide off and cure it, but it's very durable, more durable than, you know, cowhide or pig hide. And you could still go online and buy shark hide products, but a bad thing about doing this type of process is you usually spoil the meat doing it. So the meat's, you know, not really good for human consumption after that point, and they would use it for fertilizer or bait. And of course the meat, when I was coming up through graduate school and made it to the ocean in North Carolina, shark fisheries were like, you know, pretty non-existent. And actually the federal government in the United States was encouraging fishermen that were fishing grouper and snapper populations. They were saying, well, hey, you should go catch sharks because the meat is good, there's no bone, and it could be profitable. And they had brochures and just all sorts of stuff. And it did, it exploded during that time period. And the meat is, of course, delicious. There are no bones. It has to be treated a special way. You need to keep it cold and clean. There's high concentrations of urea and another element called TMAO that's in the bloodstream. So you need to leach that out of the meat, otherwise it'll have a funny odor and taste. What the commercial guys typically do is they use a brine solution. So they'll clean the sharks and bleed them out, and they put it in a salt brine, which helps leach some of that out of the meat itself. But you can see these are called, we call them logs in the industry. It's just a clean shark, and it's just solid meat except for the cartilage backbone that would run down through the shark. And of course, the big topic of shark water was the fins. This, in the recent decades, has been the biggest demise of shark populations around the world, where fishermen, at least the greedy ones, would remove the fins off the sharks and sometimes return the sharks to the ocean still alive to die a slow death of starvation. But they use these fins, of course, to make the Asian delicacy shark fin soup. And they can get upwards of $65 a pound. So you can imagine, on the greedy side of human nature, if I've got X amount of space on my boat, I can get maybe a couple bucks a pound for my meat if it's good. Mako's maybe a little bit more, versus $65 a pound. I mean, on that side of human nature, you say, well, I'm just taking the fins, throwing the rest of it back, which isn't the responsible thing to do, of course. And we're making great bounds on a state and federal level and a worldwide level to try to discourage the sale and trade of shark fins illegally. And of course, there's other shark products, and not all of them work. The shark cartilage, cancer cure is really basically unfounded. Shark liver oil you can buy in jaws and teeth, but all these are different ways for people to make money and reasons to harvest and kill sharks for, just for trinkets. So what are we doing? What are some of the management strategies that scientists are doing to try to protect sharks? Well, we've dramatically reduced quotas and retention limits on vessels. We have prohibited the harvest of many different species. And this is very sobering for me, because when I came to Florida in 1989, fresh out of graduate school, every single species on this list, including the guys down here, were legal to harvest. And to a certain extent, you could take as many as you wanted. Now, a short 20-some years later, all these species in red are now prohibited from harvest. And the ones in blue, the hammerhead species, lemons, sandbars, tigers, silkies, Florida has shut them down. The feds are shutting them down or restricting them. So it's just amazing. There's only a handful of species that can actually be harvested. And some of these are on the verge of being threatened or even extinct today. So this is important work that we're doing. They've also put size limits to like a 54-inch size limit, which is fairly large. And the reason we do that with sharks is because we want to give them a chance to mature and reproduce so they can replenish the population. So we don't allow them to catch the smaller sharks. We wait till they're a little bit larger. And all sharks now in Florida and the United States have to be landed with their fins on. So that kind of prevents the guy from lopping the fins off and throwing the carcasses over. Every shark that comes in has to have the fins attached naturally, so then they're landed in proportion to that, and it would discourage or prevent any kind of over-harvest of fins. And we're even closing areas based upon seasonality, reproductive strategies and stuff like that to try to protect pregnant females and stuff, so the pups are born and have a chance to grow up naturally. So to finish here, the reason that sharks that are so susceptible, this boom and bust nature of the fishery, is based upon their life history. They are very slow growing, so sharks grow very slowly, and that's true for most shark species. They also mature late, so some sharks may not be mature enough to give, birth or to mate until they're 10 or 15 years old. So they have to survive through that whole time period. And then when they get to that point, they have very few young, so they're not very fecund. Some sharks will skip 2 or 3 years before they reproduce again and have maybe 2 or 3 or 4 pups, and then they don't reproduce again for a few years. So you see why they're susceptible to that. So that concludes my talk for tonight. God bless you, and thank you for your time. I would be glad to answer any questions if Fred and the guys want that to go on. Would that be good? I can't see you very well. You probably can't see me either, which is a good thing.
I was wondering, what is the difference between unprovoked and provoked attacks?
Okay. An unprovoked attack is, well, let me go the other way. A provoked attack would be, you saw a nurse shark under a ledge, and you said, oh, it's just a nurse shark. I'm going to go down and pet it and take a picture with it, and it turns and bites your arm. Okay, that would still be classified as a shark bite, but it was provoked because you approached the shark and tried to pet it. Another unprovoked attack would be a diver that has, half dozen fish on a stringer and stuff, and blood in the water, and the shark comes up, tries to get it, and he accidentally gets bit. So the International Shark Attack File is the group that actually classifies those different categories. But unprovoked attack means that the human is not doing anything to encourage the shark to bite them.
So what are the provoked number of attacks? Of the provoked shark attacks? Do you know them?
Is it what?
The number of provoked attacks.
Correct. No, I don't think that's necessarily increasing as quickly as the unprovoked. And when the University of Florida, the Museum of Natural History, took over the ISAF probably 15, 20 years ago, they actually went through all the historical files and looked at all the data and information and started separating them into these different categories, because some of it was inflating the unprovoked or shark attack numbers, unintentionally, So they actually are separating them out into different categories now. So we have a better idea of those different problems.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So what percentage of shark attacks are not bite and release?
A very low percentage, from my understanding.
Less than 1%?
That's pretty close. It's very rare. I mean, and not very many people have privy to the actual descriptions of the attacks, but from what I've read, and I know George Burgess that curates the file, the ISAF file, in most instances it is just bite and release. Even if you look at the injuries, that's why most of them, like in Florida, aren't fatal, because it's usually just a single bite, maybe a couple grabs type of thing, and then they discover, hey, it's not a fish, it's not one of my normal food items, and then they swim off. So it's a very low number when the shark actually comes back and tries to take another bite per se. And that's actually true for white sharks too. It's very rare in white shark attacks that occurs.
A lot of dive outfits feed the sharks to, entertain divers.
Yeah.
Does that affect the efforts to try to preserve the sharks, the population?
That's a great question, and that's been a huge debate in many areas. In the state of Florida, our response to that, I mean, there's not enough science that's been done on it per se to really say that, well, does this change shark behavior? Does it compromise those sharks that are coming to that site all the time to feed? What's the quality of the food that they're getting? That type of thing. But there needs to be more research done in that. On the other end, if you look at a lot of the shark diving operations, they have a fairly low incident of actual shark bites, and but that would be a provoked incidence, of course, like we were talking earlier. State of Florida handled it. They just said, we're just not going to allow it. Even though it may still be safe, there's a lot of misperception and risks to public safety. Like if they're feeding sharks a couple miles from the beach, I don't necessarily think that attracting those sharks a few miles from the beach is going to cause an increase in attacks on the shoreline. But it's still a public safety in it, and you have to kind of err on the side of safety in that sense. But I do think it I don't know, I kind of have mixed feelings. I love education, and if you can get a group of people that love the water as much as many divers do, and they can interact with these and understand, if they're educating properly in a natural environment, I think it's a good thing. My preference would be seeing sharks behave like they normally behave. I don't really agree with the hand feeding and all that stuff. To me, it's a very fine line that it could hurt sharks and people at the same time. That's my personal opinion. Yes?
Can I ask you what your goal would be as a researcher and scientist in going forward?
What your goal would be as researchers and scientists going forward?
I think the goal across the board is preservation, and trying to reverse the trends of overfishing. It's baffling to me having been at the very beginning of when the shark fisheries were really starting to take off, and the support that the federal government, other people were encouraging shark fisheries, we'd seen the history in the past, and that's typical for man in a lot of different things. We don't always look back at history and learn from it. So we're in a situation now where we're trying, fishermen can't make money. So I don't, within the 10 years, I don't think there'll be any legal harvest of shark species in the Atlantic or Gulf waters, at least in the United States. I honestly think it's going to go to that point, because you saw the list of prohibited species, that's growing more and more on a daily basis. So I think our goal, in a sense, is to keep up with our understanding of the life history of species and minimize the fishery side of it, so some of these populations can regroup. Oh, we got some sprinkles coming. I'm sorry. I would love to answer any other questions that we can do in a more personal way.
Yeah, you're gonna come.
Okay, again, thank you very much to Brent Winner.
Probably not. I don't.
Thank you very much to our host tonight, Ecolodge Rendezvous.
I hope you're enjoying.
Coming up this week, obviously we told you earlier about the
my reading day.
excursion with Brent tomorrow has been changed to Thursday.
All right.
Wednesday evening, we are at Queen's Garden. We have
I may see you around.
Lauren Esposito, who will be presenting on spiders and scorpions. You can sign up at the tent for free taxi ride down or for dinner. On Thursday afternoon, we have a dive going out with Brent Winner. On Thursday evening, we have a night hike going out for spiders and scorpions with Lauren Esposito. On Friday night, we are at Shearwater for a presentation on astronomy and how it affects conservation. On Saturday evening, we have a night hike going out to look at the stars. For those that are heading back to Windwardside, not staying for dinner, Garvis is waiting up at the mountain road for you. Please watch your step going out. It's much darker now than it was when you came in. For those that are dining, your taxi driver going down will be Rodney, and he'll pick you up after dinner. Thank you very much. We hope to see you all Wednesday night.
Oh, I think someone's in
There's so much more I can share with you, like reproduction and all sorts of cool stuff. I love it.